My name is Marcus, and I was a sniper for the bounty hunter Bloods, the man they called Ghost Shot, because my targets never saw me coming and never lived to tell about it. What I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core because it's not just about being a gang member. It's about the night I became trapped in the longest shootout in Watts history, a 14-hour battle that turned an entire neighborhood into a war zone. On August 15th, 1997, what started as a routine hit on a rival gang leader turned into a siege that involved over 200 gang members, 50 police officers, and the National Guard. I was pinned down on a rooftop with nothing but my rifle, 400 rounds of ammunition, and the will to survive against impossible odds. If you think you know what real warfare looks like, if you think you understand what it means to fight for your life, you're about to learn why sometimes one man with a rifle can hold off an entire army. The 14 hours I spent on that rooftop changed the history of gang warfare in Los Angeles forever, and what happened when the sun finally rose will shock you more than the battle itself. Before we go deeper, let me be absolutely clear about why I'm sharing this story. I'm not here to glorify violence or make myself sound like some kind of hero. I'm here to warn you about what happens when gang warfare escalates beyond all reason, when one night of violence can consume an entire community. For 6 years, I was a sniper for the bounty hunter Bloods in Watts, one of the most feared and respected marksmen in the Blood Nation. My job was to eliminate high-value targets from long distance, rival gang leaders, informants, anyone who posed a threat to our organization. I thought I was a soldier in a righteous war, protecting my community from enemies who wanted to destroy everything we had built. I was wrong about everything. I wasn't a soldier. I was an assassin who killed people from the shadows like a coward. I wasn't protecting my community. I was terrorizing it with random acts of violence that made everyone less safe. I wasn't fighting a war. I was participating in a cycle of revenge that had no purpose beyond feeding the egos of men who saw human life as disposable. The longest shootout in Watts history wasn't a battle between good and evil. It was a massacre that destroyed families, traumatized children, and turned a neighborhood into a battlefield for no reason other than pride and stupidity. I grew up in the Jordan Downs housing projects during the height of the crack epidemic, when gang membership was one of the few paths to respect, protection, and financial stability for young black men. My father was killed in a drive-by shooting when I was 8, and my mother worked 3 jobs just to keep us housed and fed. The bounty hunter Bloods weren't just a gang in our neighborhood. They were the law, the government, and the protection all rolled into one organization. They settled disputes, provided security, and most importantly, they offered young men like me a chance to gain respect through skill rather than just violence. I joined when I was 15, but unlike most recruits who started as lookouts or street soldiers, I was identified early as having exceptional marksmanship abilities. The older members noticed that I could hit targets at distances that other shooters couldn't even see, and they began training me as a sniper, a specialized role that required patience, precision, and the ability to kill without emotion. By the time I was 18, I was the most accurate shooter in the set, capable of eliminating targets from over 500 yards away. I thought this skill made me valuable, respected, and untouchable. I had no idea it was turning me into a monster who would eventually be trapped by my own reputation. The role of a gang sniper is unlike any other position in the organization. While street soldiers engage in close-quarters combat and drive-by shootings, snipers operate alone, from concealed positions, eliminating targets who never see death coming. The psychological profile required for this work is specific. You have to be able to watch a target through a scope for hours, learning their habits and routines, then kill them with a single shot while feeling nothing. You have to be comfortable with isolation, patient enough to wait for the perfect shot, and emotionally detached enough to pull the trigger on another human being without hesitation. I thought I was perfect for this role because I was naturally calm under pressure and had always been a loner. What I didn't understand was that the emotional detachment required for sniping would eventually cut me off from my own humanity, making it impossible to form meaningful relationships or feel genuine emotions about anything. The skills that made me an effective killer also made me incapable of being a complete human being. Every successful hit made me more valuable to the organization, but less connected to the people around me, until I became a weapon that happened to be housed in a human body. My reputation as a sniper grew throughout the Blood Nation during my first 3 years in the role. I was credited with over 30 successful eliminations, including several high-ranking members of rival Crips sets who had been considered untouchable. The precision of my shots and the impossibility of tracking my position made me a legend in the gang world. Some people thought I was multiple shooters, others believed I had supernatural abilities, and a few rival sets put bounties on my head that reached 6 figures. The bounty hunter Blood leadership used my reputation as a psychological weapon, letting it be known that anyone who crossed our set might find themselves in the crosshairs of Ghost Shot. The fear I generated was more valuable than the actual eliminations I carried out, because it made our enemies paranoid and cautious, always looking over their shoulders, never feeling safe, even in their own territory. But with that reputation came increasing pressure to take on more difficult targets, more dangerous assignments, and more complex operations that pushed the boundaries of what one sniper could accomplish. The leadership began to see me as invincible, capable of solving any problem with a single well-placed bullet. They had no idea that their faith in my abilities would eventually lead to a situation that almost destroyed the entire neighborhood. The assignment that led to the longest shootout in Watt's history came on a hot August morning in 1997. Intelligence had reached our leadership that Marcus Big Tank Williams, a high-ranking member of the Grape Street Watts Crips, was planning a major offensive against bounty hunter territory that would involve coordinated attacks on our drug operations, our safe houses, and potentially our families. Big Tank was known throughout South Central as a strategic mastermind who had successfully orchestrated several territorial expansions for his set, and the leadership considered him an existential threat to our organization. The decision was made to eliminate him before he could launch his offensive, and I was chosen for the assignment because of my track record with high-value targets. The intelligence indicated that Big Tank would be attending a birthday party for his nephew at a house on Grape Street, surrounded by security, but potentially vulnerable to a long-range shot from a sniper position. I was given 48 hours to plan the operation, identify the best shooting position, and eliminate the target. It seemed like a routine assignment, difficult but well within my capabilities. I had no idea that I was walking into a trap that had been months in the planning. The reconnaissance phase of the operation took me 2 days of careful observation and planning. The target house was located in the heart of Grape Street Crip territory, surrounded by loyal residents and protected by multiple layers of security. But I identified a perfect sniper position on the roof of an abandoned apartment building about 400 yards away, with clear lines of sight to the target house and multiple escape routes if the operation went wrong. The building had been condemned for years, making it unlikely that anyone would be inside, and the roof access was concealed enough that I could get into position without being detected. I spent hours studying the target's patterns, the security arrangements, and the timing of the party to identify the perfect moment for the shot. Everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly, too perfectly, as I would later realize. On the night of August 15th, I made my way to the sniper position under cover of darkness, carrying my rifle, 400 rounds of ammunition, and enough supplies to sustain me through a long operation if necessary. I reached the roof at 11 p.m., set up my shooting position, and began the final phase of surveillance before taking the shot. At 11:47 p.m., Big Tank appeared in the window of the target house, exactly where intelligence had predicted he would be. I lined up the shot, controlled my breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet found its target, and Big Tank dropped immediately. Mission accomplished, or so I thought. The moment my shot rang out, the entire neighborhood exploded into chaos. What I didn't know was that the Grape Street Crips had been expecting an assassination attempt and had turned the birthday party into an elaborate trap designed to capture or kill the bounty hunter blood sniper they knew would come. The house was surrounded by over 50 armed Crip members who had been waiting in concealed positions for hours, and the moment my muzzle flash revealed my location, they opened fire on the building where I was positioned. The volume of gunfire was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Hundreds of rounds per minute striking the building, shattering windows, punching holes through walls, and making it impossible for me to move from my position without being killed instantly. I was trapped on that rooftop with nowhere to go, facing an enemy force that outnumbered me 50-1 and had me completely surrounded. The only advantages I had were my elevated position, my superior marksmanship skills, and the fact that they couldn't get close enough to overrun my position without exposing themselves to my rifle. What followed was 14 hours of the most intense urban warfare that Los Angeles had ever seen, a battle that would consume an entire neighborhood and change the history of gang conflict forever. The first phase of the shootout lasted from midnight until dawn, 6 hours of continuous gunfire that turned the abandoned apartment building into a fortress under siege. The Grape Street Crips tried everything to dislodge me from my position: direct assaults up the stairwells, attempts to flank the building from adjacent rooftops, and concentrated fire designed to either kill me or force me to abandon my position. But my sniper training had taught me how to use cover effectively, how to move between firing positions without exposing myself, and most importantly, how to make every shot count when ammunition was limited. I systematically eliminated anyone who tried to get close to the building, picking off attackers with single shots that sent the rest scrambling for cover. The psychological effect of facing a sniper who never missed was devastating to their morale. They knew that showing themselves for even a second could mean instant death, which made it almost impossible for them to coordinate effective attacks. But I was also trapped, unable to escape or call for reinforcements, slowly running through my ammunition supply while facing an enemy that seemed to have unlimited resources. As the hours passed, I began to realize that this wasn't just a gang conflict anymore. It was a siege that would only end when one side was completely destroyed. As dawn broke on August 16th, the situation escalated beyond anything anyone had anticipated. The sound of gunfire had awakened the entire neighborhood, and residents were calling 911 in panic as bullets flew through their windows and walls. The Los Angeles Police Department responded with massive force, sending over 50 officers to contain what they initially thought was a riot or terrorist attack. But when they arrived on scene, they found themselves caught in the middle of an active war zone, with gang members on both sides shooting at anything that moved. The police established a perimeter around the conflict area and called for SWAT teams, helicopters, and eventually the National Guard, as the situation continued to escalate. From my position on the rooftop, I could see the entire battlefield spread out below me: Grape Street Crips positioned in buildings and behind cars, police officers trying to establish control from the edges of the conflict zone, and innocent residents trapped in their homes as the battle raged around them. The arrival of law enforcement changed the dynamics of the conflict completely, because now I wasn't just fighting the Crips. I was fighting anyone who tried to approach my building, including police officers who saw me as an active shooter threatening public safety. The rules of engagement had changed, and I was now facing enemies on multiple fronts with no allies and no way out. The middle phase of the shootout, from dawn until noon, was the most intense period of the entire battle. The LAPD SWAT teams attempted to storm the building using military tactics, while the Grape Street Crips continued their own assault from the opposite direction. I found myself caught between two forces, both trying to kill me, both convinced that I was the primary threat that needed to be eliminated. The irony wasn't lost on me that the gang members and police officers who were normally enemies were now working toward the same goal: my death. I had to constantly shift positions on the rooftop, using the building's structure for cover while engaging targets on multiple sides. My ammunition was running dangerously low, and I had to make every shot count while conserving enough rounds to defend against the final assault that I knew was coming. The physical exhaustion was overwhelming. 8 hours of combat without food, water, or rest, constantly moving and shooting while adrenaline and fear kept me alert. But the psychological pressure was even worse, knowing that I was completely alone, surrounded by hundreds of enemies, with no hope of rescue or reinforcement. Every moment I survived was borrowed time, and I began to accept that I would probably die on that rooftop before the day was over. The turning point came around 2 p.m., when a news helicopter arrived to cover what had become the biggest story in Los Angeles. The live television coverage brought the entire city's attention to the battle raging in Watts, and suddenly the longest shootout in LA history was being broadcast into homes across the country. The media attention changed everything. City officials were demanding answers, community leaders were calling for peace, and the families of people trapped in the conflict zone were pleading for their loved ones' safety. But the coverage also revealed something that shocked everyone watching. The lone gunman on the rooftop, who had been holding off hundreds of attackers for over 12 hours, was just one person, a young black man who had somehow managed to survive against impossible odds. The narrative began to shift from dangerous gang shooter to incredible survival story, and public opinion started to turn in my favor. Some people saw me as a symbol of resistance against overwhelming force. Others viewed me as a victim of circumstances beyond my control, and a few even called me a hero for defending myself against such overwhelming odds. The media attention also brought pressure on law enforcement to end the siege without further casualties, which opened the door for negotiations that might not have been possible otherwise. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that the situation couldn't continue indefinitely. The neighborhood was in ruins. Dozens of people had been wounded, and the economic cost of the police response was mounting by the hour. Community leaders, including several former gang members who had gotten out of the life, began working with law enforcement to establish communication with me and explore possibilities for ending the siege peacefully. The first contact came around 4 p.m. when a bullhorn message was broadcast from the police perimeter, offering me the chance to surrender in exchange for protection from both law enforcement and rival gang members. I was skeptical at first. After 14 hours of being shot at by everyone in sight, it was hard to believe that anyone wanted to help me survive. But the negotiators were persistent, and they brought in people I recognized and trusted, including a former bounty hunter blood member who had successfully transitioned out of gang life and now worked as a community organizer. Slowly, carefully, they convinced me that there might be a way out of the situation that didn't involve my death. The negotiations were complicated by the fact that I was still surrounded by Grape Street Crips who wanted me dead, police officers who saw me as a threat, and media crews who were broadcasting every word to the entire world. The final phase of the shootout began around 6 p.m. when the negotiators managed to arrange a temporary ceasefire that would allow me to surrender safely. The terms were complex. I would throw down my weapon, walk to the edge of the rooftop with my hands visible, and be taken into protective custody by a joint team of police officers and community leaders who would ensure my safety during the arrest and booking process. In exchange, law enforcement would provide protection from retaliation and work with community organizations to address the underlying issues that had led to the conflict. The Grape Street Crips were initially opposed to any deal that allowed me to survive, but community pressure and the threat of continued police presence in their territory eventually convinced them to accept the ceasefire. At 7:23 p.m., exactly 14 hours and 36 minutes after I'd fired the shot that started the longest shootout in Watts history, I laid down my rifle, walked to the edge of the rooftop, and surrendered to the assembled authorities. The silence that followed was almost as shocking as the gunfire had been. After nearly 15 hours of continuous combat, the sudden absence of shooting was deafening. As I was led away in handcuffs, I could see the destruction that one night of violence had caused. Buildings riddled with bullet holes, cars destroyed by gunfire, and a community traumatized by a war that had accomplished nothing except proving that violence only creates more violence. The aftermath of the longest shootout in Watts history was swift and far-reaching. The media coverage had made me a household name across the country, with some people viewing me as a symbol of urban warfare and others seeing me as a victim of systemic problems that pushed young men into impossible situations. The legal proceedings were complicated by the fact that while I had clearly committed multiple felonies during the shootout, I had also been defending myself against overwhelming force in a situation that many people saw as self-defense. The community response was equally complex. Some residents blamed me for bringing violence to their neighborhood, while others recognized that the underlying gang conflicts would have erupted eventually, regardless of my actions. The political ramifications extended far beyond Watts, with city officials, law enforcement agencies, and community organizations all being forced to examine how a single assassination attempt had escalated into a neighborhood-wide battle that required National Guard intervention. The incident became a case study in urban warfare, gang violence, and community policing that influenced policy decisions for years to come. But for me personally, The most important consequence was the realization that I had spent 6 years of my life becoming a weapon that ultimately served no purpose except destruction. The legal consequences of my actions during the shootout were severe, but not as harsh as they could have been. I was charged with multiple counts of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and various weapons violations. But the circumstances of the case and the media attention it had received created opportunities for plea negotiations that might not have existed otherwise. My defense team argued that I had been acting in self-defense after being trapped in an impossible situation, while the prosecution maintained that I had initiated the violence by assassinating Big Tank and then escalated it by refusing to surrender. The case was complicated by the fact that many of the people I had shot during the 14-hour battle were also gang members who were actively trying to kill me, which made it difficult to determine who was the aggressor and who was the victim. After months of negotiations, I accepted a plea deal that resulted in a 12-year prison sentence in exchange for my cooperation with law enforcement investigations into gang activities and my participation in community programs designed to prevent gang violence. The sentence was long enough to satisfy demands for justice, but short enough to allow me the possibility of rebuilding my life when I was released. During my time in prison, I had plenty of opportunity to reflect on the choices that had led me to that rooftop and the consequences of a life built around violence. The 12 years I spent in prison were the most difficult and transformative period of my life. I had to learn how to live without the identity that had defined me for 6 years. I was no longer Ghost Shot, the feared sniper of the bounty hunter Bloods, but just another inmate trying to survive in a system designed to break people down. The adjustment was brutal, both physically and psychologically. I had to deal with threats from rival gang members who were also incarcerated, pressure from my own set to maintain my reputation through prison violence, and the constant stress of living in an environment where any mistake could be fatal. But I also had access to educational programs, counseling services, and mentorship opportunities that helped me understand how I had become the person I was, and how I could become someone different. I earned my GED, then a bachelor's degree in social work, and eventually a master's degree in conflict resolution. The academic work gave me tools for understanding the social and economic forces that had shaped my life, while the counseling helped me deal with the trauma and guilt of the violence I had committed. Most importantly, I began to develop a sense of purpose that wasn't based on my ability to hurt other people. The process of rehabilitation and personal transformation that occurred during my incarceration was slow and often painful. I had to confront the reality of what I had done during my years as a sniper, not just the people I had killed, but the families I had destroyed, the communities I had terrorized, and the cycles of violence I had perpetuated. The guilt was overwhelming at times, and there were periods when I considered suicide as the only way to escape the weight of my actions. But the counseling programs and educational opportunities available in prison helped me understand that guilt could be either destructive or constructive, depending on how it was channeled. Destructive guilt leads to self-pity, substance abuse, and giving up on the possibility of positive change. Constructive guilt leads to accountability, service, and a commitment to preventing others from making the same mistakes. I chose the constructive path, not because I was particularly virtuous, but because I realized that wallowing in self-pity wouldn't bring back the people I had killed or heal the communities I had damaged. The only way to honor their memory was to work as hard as I could to prevent future tragedies and help other young people find alternatives to the path I had chosen. During my final years in prison, I began working with community organizations that focused on gang intervention and violence prevention. The work started with speaking to at-risk youth who visited the prison as part of Scared Straight programs, sharing my story and warning them about the real consequences of gang involvement. The response was powerful. Young people who had been considering gang membership changed their minds after hearing about the 14-hour shootout and the 12 years of imprisonment that followed. Parents gained new insights into the forces that were pulling their children toward violence, and community leaders found new ways to address gang recruitment and territorial conflicts. The work was dangerous because it required me to maintain connections to the gang world while trying to help people escape from it, but it was also the most meaningful thing I had ever done with my life. For the first time since I was 15 years old, I was using my skills and experience to build something positive rather than destroy it. The reputation that had once made me feared throughout the Blood Nation was now helping me save lives and prevent the kind of violence that had consumed my youth. When I was released from prison in 2009, I faced the challenge of rebuilding my life in a world that had changed dramatically during my 12 years of incarceration. Technology had advanced, the gang landscape had evolved, and the community I returned to was dealing with new problems and opportunities that I had to learn to navigate. The transition from prison to legitimate society was difficult. Finding employment with a felony record, rebuilding relationships with family members who had been affected by my choices, and learning to function in a world where conflicts were resolved through dialogue rather than violence. But I also had advantages that many former inmates don't possess: a college education, experience in community work, and a story that resonated with people who were working to address gang violence and urban poverty. I was able to find work with a non-profit organization that focused on gang intervention, using my experience and credibility to reach young people who were facing the same choices I had faced 20 years earlier. The work was challenging but rewarding, giving me a sense of purpose that I had never experienced during my years as a sniper. The work I do now focuses on helping young people understand the reality of gang life before they get too deep to escape. I speak at schools, community centers, and juvenile detention facilities about my experience as a sniper, about the 14-hour shootout that made me famous, and about the 12 years of imprisonment that followed. The message is always the same. The respect and power that gangs promise come at a cost that's higher than anyone can afford to pay. And the skills that make you valuable to a gang are the same skills that will eventually destroy your life. I tell them about the 30 people I killed during my 6 years as a sniper, about the families that were destroyed by my actions, about the night I spent 14 hours on a rooftop fighting for my life against impossible odds. Some of them listen, some of them don't, but I keep telling the story because I know that if it prevents even one young person from making the same mistakes I made, if it saves even one family from the kind of loss I caused, then all the pain and risk of sharing my story will have been worth it. The work is dangerous because it requires me to maintain some connection to the gang world, but it's also the most important thing I've ever done with my life. The impact of the longest shootout in Watt's history extended far beyond the immediate participants and continues to influence gang violence prevention efforts today. The incident became a case study in urban warfare that law enforcement agencies across the country use to train officers for similar situations. The media coverage raised public awareness about the complexity of gang conflicts and the social conditions that create them, leading to increased funding for community programs and intervention efforts. The community response demonstrated that even the most violent conflicts can be resolved through dialogue and negotiation if the right people are involved and the right incentives are created. Most importantly, the incident showed that individual choices can have consequences that extend far beyond the person making them, affecting entire communities and influencing policy decisions for years to come. The 14 hours I spent on that rooftop changed my life, but they also changed the way people think about gang violence, community policing, and the possibility of redemption for people who have committed terrible acts. The psychological impact of surviving 14 hours of continuous combat is something that I still deal with today, more than 25 years after the incident. Post-traumatic stress disorder, survivor's guilt, and the constant replaying of violent memories are challenges that affect every aspect of my daily life. The sounds of gunfire, the sight of muzzle flashes, the feeling of being trapped and surrounded, all of these sensations can be triggered by unexpected events that transport me back to that rooftop in an instant. The treatment for combat-related PTSD has improved dramatically since my release from prison, and I've been able to access counseling and therapy services that have helped me manage these symptoms. But the memories will never completely go away, and in some ways, I don't want them to. They serve as a constant reminder of the cost of violence and the importance of the work I do now to prevent other young people from experiencing similar trauma. The nightmares and flashbacks are the price I pay for the choices I made, and they keep me focused on ensuring that my survival serves a purpose beyond just my own redemption. The relationship between media coverage and gang violence is complex and often problematic, as demonstrated by the extensive coverage of the longest shootout in Watts history. On one hand, the media attention brought important issues to public attention and created pressure for policy changes that might not have occurred otherwise. On the other hand, the coverage also glamorized violence and created a celebrity status around gang activities that could encourage copycat incidents. The live television coverage of the 14-hour battle turned a local gang conflict into national entertainment, with viewers across the country watching the violence unfold in real time. This kind of coverage can have unintended consequences, making gang members famous for their violent acts and potentially inspiring others to seek similar notoriety. The challenge for media organizations is how to report on important social issues without contributing to the problems they're covering. In my case, the media attention ultimately helped save my life by creating public pressure for a peaceful resolution, but it also turned me into a symbol of gang violence that I'm still trying to overcome 25 years later. The evolution of gang warfare tactics since the longest shootout in Watts history reflects broader changes in technology, law enforcement capabilities, and social conditions in urban communities. The kind of prolonged, stationary battle that I was involved in would be much more difficult to sustain today, given advances in police surveillance technology, rapid response capabilities, and community communication systems. Modern gang conflicts tend to be more mobile, more targeted, and more focused on avoiding the kind of public attention that my incident generated. The use of social media has also changed the dynamics of gang violence, making it easier to coordinate attacks, but also easier for law enforcement to monitor and prevent them. The lessons learned from incidents like the Watts shootout have influenced both gang tactics and police response strategies, creating an ongoing arms race between criminal organizations and law enforcement agencies. Understanding these evolving dynamics is crucial for developing effective prevention and intervention strategies that can address the root causes of gang violence rather than just responding to its symptoms. Before I finish my story, I need something from you. If this video has impacted you in any way, if it's made you think differently about gang violence, about the consequences of choosing violence over dialogue, about the possibility of redemption even after terrible acts, I need you to share it. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's a young person in your family who's attracted to the power and respect that gangs seem to offer. Maybe it's a parent who's trying to understand what their child might be getting involved in. Maybe it's a community leader who's looking for new approaches to gang violence prevention. Your share could save someone from making the same mistakes I made. Your comment could reach someone who's currently involved in gang activities and looking for a way out. Your engagement helps this message reach more people who need to understand that the respect gangs promise is an illusion, that the power they offer comes at a cost that's higher than anyone can afford to pay, and that there are always alternatives to violence. I also want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your thoughts, your experiences, your questions, whether you agree with everything I've said or not, whether my story resonates with you or challenges you. I want to know. This conversation doesn't end when the video stops. It continues in the comments, in the discussions you have with your families, in the choices you make when faced with pressure to solve problems through violence. So please, take a moment right now to engage with this content. Your voice matters, your story matters, and together we can create change that prevents other young people from following the same destructive path. Share your own experiences with violence and healing. Tell me about times when you chose dialogue over conflict, or ask questions about how to help someone who might be involved in gang activities. The more we talk about these issues openly and honestly, the more we can help each other make better choices. To anyone watching this who is currently involved in gang activities, who feels trapped by circumstances beyond their control, who thinks that violence is the only way to gain respect or solve problems, I want you to know that you have more power than you realize. You have the power to choose differently, to find peaceful solutions to conflicts, to build something positive instead of contributing to destruction. It won't be easy, and it will require more courage than any act of violence you've ever committed, but it is possible. You are not condemned to a life of violence and imprisonment forever. You are not defined by the worst decisions you've made. You are not too far gone to change direction and build something meaningful with your life. I spent 6 years as a sniper, killed 30 people, and survived the longest shootout in LA history, and I was able to find a way to use that experience to help others instead of continuing to hurt them. If I can make that choice, if I can find the courage to face my past and work for a better future, then so can you. The first step is believing that you deserve better than a life built on fear and violence. The second step is reaching out for help. There are people waiting to support you, programs designed to help people transition out of gang life, and opportunities available that you might not even know exist. My name is Marcus, and I was ghost shot, the bounty hunter blood sniper who survived the longest shootout in Watts history. Today, I choose to be known as someone who uses his experience to prevent violence rather than cause it, who believes in the power of redemption and second chances, who works every day to ensure that other young people don't make the same mistakes I made. This is my story, my testimony, and my warning. Gang life is not a path to respect or success. It's a trap that destroys everything you care about and everyone you love. The skills that make you valuable to a gang are the same skills that will eventually lead to your destruction. The conflicts that seem so important when you're in the middle of them are meaningless when viewed from the perspective of time and experience. But there is hope, there are alternatives, and there is help available for anyone brave enough to choose a different path. If this video has impacted you, please don't just watch and move on. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts, your story, or your questions. Your engagement helps this message reach more people, and your voice adds to the conversation that can save lives. Remember, every choice you make matters, every act of violence or peace shapes your community, and every person has the power to choose construction over destruction. Thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of the solution. Stay strong, choose peace, and never let pride or anger destroy what you love.